When people feel stuck inside a system, escalation is the instinctive response. If the first attempt doesn't work, the next step is to push higher. Ask for a supervisor. File an appeal. Submit a complaint. Demand review by someone with more authority. Escalation feels like progress. It feels like action. It feels like regaining control. Doing nothing feels passive. Escalation feels proactive. It feels like you're forcing the system to pay attention. And in small systems, escalation sometimes works. In a small office, a small business, or a tight-knit organization, moving an issue upward can put it in front of someone with real discretion, someone who can listen, weigh context, and make an exception. But in large systems, escalation rarely changes the outcome. That isn't because escalation is ignored. It's because escalation means something very different inside large, structured systems than most people expect. Most people believe escalation moves a problem closer to someone who can make a judgment call. They imagine authority increasing as the issue moves upward. More experience, more discretion, more power to override the original decision. That mental model comes from human hierarchies. It assumes higher levels exist to resolve ambiguity, apply common sense, and correct outcomes that feel wrong. Large systems do not operate on that logic. In large systems, escalation does not usually mean more freedom. It means more constraint. Escalation routes an issue into parts of the system designed to reduce risk, not resolve frustration. Each additional level introduces more oversight, more documentation, and more formal rule enforcement. Authority increases, but flexibility decreases. This is why escalation so often feels slower instead of faster. To understand why, you have to understand what escalation actually represents inside a system. Escalation is not a shortcut. It is a control mechanism. When a case is escalated, it is no longer treated as routine. It becomes sensitive. That sensitivity triggers safeguards. Additional review steps appear. Documentation requirements increase. The tolerance for deviation drops. From the system's perspective, escalation is a signal. It signals risk. Risk can mean legal exposure. It can mean inconsistency with past decisions. It can mean reputational consequences. It can mean precedent-setting outcomes that could affect thousands of future cases. So escalation causes the system to tighten, not loosen. This feels backward to individuals because escalation feels urgent. But urgency is not what large systems respond to. Large systems respond to classification. An escalated case is classified differently than a normal one. Once classified as escalated, the system's priorities shift. Speed becomes less important. Defensibility becomes critical. Every action must be justifiable later, often to someone who was not present for the original interaction. This is why escalation often moves cases out of flexible workflows and into rigid ones. At lower levels, some discretion may exist. Frontline workers may be able to clarify, interpret, or guide. At higher levels, decisions must align precisely with policy, precedent, and audit requirements. There is less room to maneuver, not more. Another reason escalation rarely changes outcomes is that escalation usually does not introduce new information. People assume escalation brings fresh eyes. In reality, escalation usually brings verification. The escalated reviewer is not there to reconsider the situation from scratch. They are there to confirm whether the original decision followed the established rules. If it did, escalation ends there. This is why escalation responses often feel repetitive. The language changes slightly. The explanation may sound more formal. But the conclusion stays the same. From the system's perspective, this repetition is intentional. Escalation exists to confirm consistency, not to increase success rates. If escalation frequently overturned decisions, it would undermine the system's credibility. It would signal that initial decisions are unreliable or arbitrary. That instability would be far more damaging than individual dissatisfaction. So escalation pathways are intentionally conservative. Another common misunderstanding is the belief that escalation applies pressure to individuals. In reality, escalation removes individual discretion. Once a case is escalated, individuals matter less. Process matters more. Communication becomes formal. Language becomes careful. Everything becomes documented. This is why escalated interactions often feel colder and more procedural. The system is no longer managing a customer experience. It is managing exposure. There is another subtle but important reason escalation fails: volume normalization. Large systems are designed with the expectation that many people will escalate. Complaints, appeals, and supervisor requests are not exceptions. They are built into the baseline workload. Because of that, escalation does not create urgency. It creates another category. Once escalation becomes common, it stops being special. The system absorbs it. This is why escalation does not apply pressure in the way people expect. Pressure only exists when something is rare. In large systems, escalation is routine. This pattern appears across nearly every institutional environment. In government systems, escalation becomes appeals. Appeals are slower, more formal, and harder to win than initial reviews. They exist to correct errors, not to grant exceptions. In corporate environments, escalation becomes compliance review. Compliance teams are not empowered to bend rules. Their role is to ensure rules are followed exactly, not flexibly. In academic institutions, escalation becomes committees. Committees move slowly because they are designed to distribute responsibility and reduce individual liability, not to act quickly. In healthcare and insurance, escalation becomes utilization review. These reviews exist to prevent deviation, not encourage it. Across domains, escalation does not unlock flexibility, it locks it down. This is why escalation works only in narrow situations. Escalation can help when genuinely new information exists. When a procedural error occurred. When the system failed to follow its own stated rules. Escalation rarely helps when rules were applied correctly. When deadlines were missed. When thresholds were not met. When outcomes feel unfair but compliant. Most escalations fall into this second category. From the system's perspective, fairness does not mean satisfying individuals. It means treating similar cases the same way over time. Escalation does not change that definition. Another reason escalation fails is resource protection. If escalation reliably changed outcomes, systems would be overwhelmed by volume alone. Every denial would become provisional. Every rule would become negotiable. So escalation pathways are intentionally narrow. They exist to filter, not to reward persistence. This is why repeated escalation rarely helps. It increases attention without increasing leverage. At some point, escalation simply exhausts the available pathways. The system does not break, it closes. This leads to one of the most frustrating realizations for individuals. Effort and outcome are weakly correlated inside large systems. Doing more does not necessarily move the needle. Escalation feels active. It feels like control. But in many systems, the only thing that changes is your position in the queue. Understanding this reframes escalation entirely. Escalation is not a strategy for forcing outcomes. It is a diagnostic tool. If escalation changes the result, it usually means the system made a mistake. If escalation does not change the result, it means the system is functioning as designed. That distinction matters. Once you understand how escalation actually functions, it becomes easier to decide when to use it, and when it is simply symbolic. Escalation is powerful only when it introduces new facts or corrects errors. It is ineffective when it challenges outcomes that are already defensible. This is not intuitive, but it is consistent. Large systems do not reward persistence. They reward alignment with structure. If you want to understand why systems behave this way, and why intuitive strategies so often fail, subscribe to Inside the System. Future videos will break down how authority, risk, and decision-making actually work inside large organizations, and why outcomes so often feel disconnected from effort.